The Worcester Historical Museum was organized in 1875 and continues 142 years later to be the library and museum of the history of the city of Worcester. We collect, preserve, and interpret all aspects of Worcester history in all time periods for all audiences and all subject areas. So we are the family scrapbook, if nothing else. We're the family album. It's where people come to learn about their community, and also where they come to document their family, their business, their neighborhood, their past. Well, I always find that an interesting question, the 7 hills of Worcester. If you look at a map, I think you'll find more than 7. But there are 7 official hills of Worcester that start at Holy Cross, on Packagug Hill, which was a Nipmuc region, to Union Hill, which we would probably call Providence Hill, was originally called Sabatasket Hill, named after the Indian population, that was a native population that was here. Then you move to Chandler Hill, an unusual name for the space, the area of Worcester that goes up Belmont Street and goes down to East Park. Chandler Hill after one of the early settlers of Worcester. Then you go to Green Hill. You go to Bancroft Hill, where Bancroft Tower is, part of Bancroft Heights, and then you've got the rest of the hills that are on the official list. But then there's Airport Hill. I think what you find is that the 7 hills of Worcester are a 1950s attempt to sell this great city of Worcester and associate it with the other cities of the famous 7 hills. Well, diners are a great Worcester phenomenon, although they're not invented in Worcester. They're invented in Providence by a guy by the name of Walter Scott, who has a horse-drawn lunch wagon. If you think of them like a roach truck of the 21st century, a motorized vehicle, horse-drawn lunch wagon that was going around at night or third shift to meet the needs of people who are working, maybe at a downtown entertainment. They were originally night lunch wagons. They had to remain mobile. Walter Scott never comes to Worcester, but Samuel Messer Jones brings his idea to Worcester in 1886, and by 1887, 88 is building horse-drawn lunch wagons, so that in 1900 there are as many as 45 on the streets of Worcester. By the 1920s, however, the lunch wagon, the night lunch wagon, had been transformed into a dining car, expanded in size a little bit, and less mobile. And oftentimes the wheels were literally removed from the original lunch wagons, or the new ones were designed without wheels. And that represents a change in the city ordinance, that you didn't have to be mobile. If you think of a food truck in the 21st century, that has to be somewhat mobile. You can stay in a space for an hour or 2 hours. So they take the wheels off, and the dining car gets shortened to diner. They're placed for comfort food, for neighborhood gossip, long before we'd all be checking our Facebook accounts every 5 minutes or checking for the latest email. You'd go there to get the news. That might be the only place in your neighborhood, your work neighborhood, where there was a television. So you'd go to catch up with your friends, get good, easily acquired, reasonably priced home cooking. The diner is part of Worcester today. However, the number of diners in downtown Worcester has changed dramatically. Where there used to be one on almost every street corner when there was a work population in downtown, they moved out of downtown Worcester in the 1950s and 60s with this major urban renewal that brought about Worcester Center and moving the construction or heavy industry out to industrial parks, and the diners went with them. And eventually just sort of lost their popularity as they were replaced by other forms of food provider. The diners that remain in Worcester are certainly iconic, and we celebrate them every day, and they are great places to go, but they're certainly limited in numbers. Well, hopefully everyone is familiar with the three-decker since they are iconic on the Worcester landscape. There was an article written in 1957 by the city of Worcester that claimed there were 13,000 three-deckers in Worcester. 26 years later, a scholar from Clark says there are as many as 4,300 remaining. They're built largely between the 1880s and 1930s as the approach to dense housing that's affordable, that's pleasant, still has lawn space, has outdoor space for the large numbers of people who are working in Worcester's industries that are in those days concentrated very much in downtown, which is why you see so many nearby. They are a good use of land. They maximize the density. They are a good source of income if you are the owner. And they're also a great approach to reasonable living for a family or an extended family. Worcester is the home of the iconic All-American Smiley Face. Make no doubt about it. It was in December of 1963 that Harvey Ball created the iconic All-American Smiley Face, or Happy Face. It depends on who you talk to, which one you call it. We call it Smiley Face. Harvey Ball creates it in December of 1963 in response to a request from Joy Young, who was the marketing person from the Worcester Mutual Companies. The Worcester Mutual Companies were a number of shareholder companies, mutual companies. One of them had purchased controlling interest in a couple of others in Ohio and other places. So just like workforce in the 21st century, as numbers of people are changing, job definitions are changing, people were concerned about their future in the workplace. So Joy Young decided that they had to have a happiness campaign, a smile campaign. So based on Smile, You're on Candid Camera, she went to Harvey Ball and asked him to make a smile pin. She simply wanted a mouth with a smile. And it's Harvey Ball, local graphics artist, who realized that if you didn't add the eyes, you could wear it upside down so a smile would become a frown. So it's introduced on January 4th of 1964 in the Mutualite, which was the State Mutual Association newsletter. The first time it appears in print, and for 3 or 4 years it's merely an internal campaign. They gave buttons to people for the best smile. They gave stickers to their agents, and they said, we're the happiest company. And by 1967, they had given away more smile buttons than Avis We Try Harder buttons. In 1969, it starts to go a little bit more public, and in 1970, the Spain brothers in Philadelphia adapted it to be on some buttons and cards they were making, and that's when it goes national and international. There are a couple of steps in the middle there, I left them out, but it goes to the Spain brothers, and they're the ones who appear on What's My Line as the creators of the Smiley Face, when in fact, it was Harvey Ball of Worcester, Massachusetts, who created the iconic All-American Smiley Face, the symbol of international happiness and goodwill. Worcester was a city of invention and enterprise and creativity, creative solutions to problems. You might think of the monkey wrench, where you can change the size of the grip with one hand. Imagine being in a factory where your machines are working in tandem and you had to make a quick repair. So it's the Coase brothers of Worcester, Massachusetts, who create the monkey wrench. One of the other very creative inventions from Worcester was the steam calliope. If you think of a circus and the doot-doot-doot-doot music that comes from it, it was Joshua Stoddard, who believed he could tune the steam whistles that were replacing the hand-pulled bells in the factory system as they transitioned from water power to steam engines. He decided he could tune those steam whistles and make music. The local newspaper wrote that the cow's tails curled and the pigs danced pirouettes in the street the first time it was used. We're not certain that that's a positive review, but we do know that within years, like 2 or 3 years, they are immediately being sold to Mississippi riverboats, where they're still preeminent today. If you want to hear the earliest American steam calliope, and not a first generation from Worcester, there's not one that survives, you have to go to the Mississippi River. One of Worcester's best kept secrets is that it did not invent the Valentine. We are always telling the world we created the Valentine when we, in fact, did not. The hearts on the street signs, the hearts you see everywhere are a reference to Worcester as the heart of the Commonwealth, the slogan for Worcester as early as the 1820s. What happens in Worcester is that Esther Howland perfects the manufacture of assembled Valentines, and actually not manufacture, the assembling of multi-layer Valentines. It's an assembly line. Someone has responsibility for the background, the lace, the neck sticker, and they just create Valentines all day long, so no two are ever alike. That's what she perfects in Worcester. And she sells that business to George Whitney, who then turns to the new 4-color printing press and creates what we think of as a modern card industry, where he takes those same designs, but he prints them. And so by the last quarter of the 19th century, Worcester was the center of the American Valentine making industry at the hands of George C. Whitney Company. They got a business in 1940s because of paper shortage during World War II, and that ends Worcester's role as the non-creator of the American Valentine. Actually, at times we will tell the world we created the Valentine. It's not true. Among Worcester's other claims to fame is the invention of candlepin bowling. And we certainly were a major player in the creation, the evolution of the birth control pill. And in the 21st century, you'll get things like the home AIDS test, or you'll get Humira, or which are all Worcester discoveries, if not inventions. Worcester celebrates its role in American baseball history as the place where the first perfect game was pitched in June of 1880. June 12th of 1880, John Lee Richmond was coming to Worcester from Providence to play for the Worcester, what are sometimes called the Worcester Brown Stockings, but really more appropriately called the Worcesters, a major league team. Worcester's brief entree into the major league. He comes to Worcester, and in a game played against Cleveland, he pitches the first no-hitter in all of baseball history. The first perfect game, the score is 1-0 Worcester favor, and J. Lee Richmond goes down in history as the guy who did it. By chance, by design, who knows, but it's Worcester. And of course, the other piece of really great Worcester baseball history is that on June 3rd of 1888, Casey at the Bat was published in the San Francisco Examiner, having been written at 67 Chatham Street, Worcester, Massachusetts, by Ernest L. Thayer. Thayer had been in the employ of Hearst in California, owed him one more piece, but he came home to help his family in their mills in Cherry Valley. So he wrote Casey at the Bat here in Worcester and sent it off to Hearst. It's usually associated with San Francisco, but it's yet another Worcester first. Bancroft Tower is a memorial to George Bancroft that was built at the request of Stephen Salisbury III in 1900. It was part of his development of what we call today Massachusetts Avenue, but he was calling Bancroft Heights, that great street with the strip of grass in the middle where he was setting a new tone for building in Worcester. And this park that the tower was the capstone of was part of his design. It's a folly, essentially. It was a chance for people to go recreate. When it was new, it was probably one of the tallest sites in Worcester where you could climb up to the top of the tower and you could see this great city. Imagine, it's 1900. We don't have a lot of tall buildings. There aren't many people who've been up in the air. And we haven't looked back at Earth from space. So this was a great excitement to people to be able to go up there and see what Worcester looked like. It was designed by local architect Stephen Earle. And as I said, it's a memorial to George Bancroft, who was born here in Worcester. Bancroft was the author of the first 10-volume history of the United States. He was later the ambassador to Great Britain and then to Prussia. And his even greater claim to fame perhaps was as Secretary of the Navy for President Polk, and he was secretary when they established Annapolis. So when he dies in the late 1890s, Stephen Salisbury III felt that this was an appropriate memorial to his father's best friend from childhood. The current Union Station was completed in 1911. It replaced the first Union Station, which was built across the street where the new hotel is coming in. That Union Station was very Richardsonian, great big granite building with a huge tower. And it was built in 1875. And what it did was it brought logic and order to the railroad lines in Worcester. They all went to a single station. Where you'd had multiple stations all over town, you'd have to run from one to the other, you'd have to transfer goods. This made a Union Station. And it signaled to the people of Worcester that Worcester really was becoming a major city. It was simply outgrown, and 36 years later, it's replaced by this enormous new white temple of a Union Station with its gorgeous towers that were replaced as part of the renovation. Opens in 1911. I think it's only 1926 when the towers are first removed because they're unstable. And then by the 1960s, the Union Station had really fallen into total decay and disrepair. In fact, the city of Worcester, as part of this downtown urban renewal, wanted to remove it. They wanted to tear it down and build a much smaller cinder block station. It never happened, and I don't know quite why, some arrangement with the railroads, so that when it became available again in the 1980s, the plan was to restore it and make it the transportation hub for Worcester. Thus the move of the bus company next to it, and thus its role in relating Worcester and Boston and helping grow the population of Worcester today. People who live in Worcester and work in Boston because of the proximity of the railroad, the MBTA line, the daily line to Worcester and Boston. It's critical from that perspective, but it's also an emblematic of Worcester's role as the heart of the Commonwealth. As early as the 1820s, Worcester was recognized as being at the center of the New England transportation routes. And it's really what makes Worcester grow over time. That the railroad lines all went through Worcester. As early as 1835, we're connected to Boston by railroad. Then the western lines come in, and those lines all go through Worcester. So if you're a manufacturer, you can easily get finished goods in, raw materials in and out. And if you're coming to America from somewhere else, you can easily go to Castle Garden, get a train to Worcester and get a job in this great industry, city filled with industry. If you go to Boston, you can get the train to Worcester. And if the reality is that if you're a farmer in northern New Hampshire, like my great-great-grandfather, you could easily get to Worcester on the train, and Worcester was the hub of activity. So Union Station is, I think, the emblem of that. It's also part of the future of growth of the city, in that we are becoming a somewhat of a residential community, a bedroom community for folks who are making the trek daily to Boston or something close to Boston, and the railroad is the emblem for it. If you think of Union Station and you think of everyone who's gone through it because they're coming to Worcester to live, they're going somewhere else to work, or they're leaving to go to war, they're coming back from war, it is the place that people have met and celebrated Worcester. It was restored starting in the 1990s at a cost of about $40 million. It was originally built for $750,000 in 1911. Kelley Square is Worcester. Kelley Square is the embodiment of Worcester. If you think of what people think about Worcester, and you can't say Spags anymore, and you can't say we invented the Valentine, but you can celebrate Kelley Square. Kelley Square is the result of probably less planning than people would assume, and just reality of Worcester expanding. At one point, it was the site of a lock in the Blackstone Canal, so there was stop and go traffic even then. And then as streets are added to it, and then Vernon Street goes up the hill, it's just a result of great civic growth. In the 1950s, the city decided they were going to come to grips with Kelley Square, and they were going to put traffic lights in. They lasted, I think, only months before they realized that that only made the situation worse, that people drive Kelley Square because it is logical, as long as you just don't feel like you always have to have the lead. And in our 50 Objects exhibit, that's why we have the great bumper sticker that says, "This car survived Kelley Square." The Worcester Canal District is a reference to Worcester's leadership role as the northern terminus of the Blackstone Canal. On October 7th of 1828, the Blackstone Canal connects Worcester essentially with Providence and begins Worcester's role as a great industrial city. Perhaps a little bit of an overstatement, but what it does is it connects Worcester and all of northern Worcester County and the central Massachusetts region with the sea. Whereas before you'd have to go to Boston. It could take you an entire day, cost you a lot of money. Now you can use a canal boat to get your raw materials in and your finished goods out. It's a transportation network. And as a result, Worcester becomes a funnel. So if you go to Southbridge Street, today you still see the sign at the station that says the Port of Worcester. Worcester was the port. And the Canal District is a revival of Worcester and the desire to recreate that great economic engine that came with the opening of the Blackstone Canal. To give life back to buildings that once bordered the canal or were near the canal, and to create a district that's the center of creative design, of nightlife, of creative economy, from whether it's the White Room or something like Birch Tree Bakery. There is a desire to replicate or open the Blackstone Canal. If you study the history of the canal, you realize that the terrain has changed significantly. So actually opening the canal is probably a little bit of a problem, especially since also in the 1860s it began to be incorporated into the city's sewer system, and the shape of the canal was rebuilt. So it'd be a massive infrastructure project, but you could certainly replicate it. There'd be nothing wrong with a lap pool that runs all the way from Union Station down to Quinsigamond Avenue and replicates the canal and creates that environment where you could sit next to the water and have a cocktail, or you could ice skate in the winter, as a lot of other cities have done. The reuse of the concept of the Blackstone Canal in 21st century Worcester could be very exciting. Quinsigamond Plantation was the first name of Worcester. It comes from the Indian populations, the native populations that lived here, like Packagug Hill, where Holy Cross is, or Sabatascus Hill, or almost any town in eastern Massachusetts that used to have a native generated name. By the late 17th century, they're all being changed to English names. So Quinsigamond was the reference to the pond, and this Quinsigamond Plantation was the land grant around it. But by the 1870s, certainly, Worcester is becoming much more popularly used as the name, and their towns would choose English names. You know, chose Worcester because Cromwell wins over Charles II in Worcester, England. Did people have real connections to Worcester, family there? No one really knows the answer to that. Maybe they just thought it was a great English name. Worcester has the great advantage, or the great benefit of lots of parks. There are tens of thousands of acres of public park in Worcester. The very first one was probably Worcester Common. As part of the original land grant, there were 20 acres set aside for common use, and it was certainly something of a park. If you think of the Boston Common and Boston Garden, same idea. That park is down to 5 acres now. When Elm Park is purchased in 1854, it was the first serious attempt to get people a place where they could recreate, where they could get away from the factory environment, they could return to Mother Nature in a town that is growing by leaps and bounds in the 1850s. And so they purchased the land, and Edward Winslow Lincoln, over the course of the next 20 years, sets out building the park, creating the ponds and the bridges that are there, and plants hundreds of thousands, no, not hundreds of thousands, hundreds of species of plant material to give people this wonderful urban park environment. Because think of Worcester that's filled with factory buildings and smoke, and people going to work 6 days a week and not having a lot of time to recreate, and think about the limited space around the three deckers. His desire was for people to have a better life, clean air, place to stroll and see their friends and have a good time. That grows by leaps and bounds with the park system and the desire for kids to have a place to recreate. And of course, the biggest one that's acquired is 1905, when the Green family partially gifts to the city of Worcester the almost 500 acres of Green Hill Park. That's the biggest. But the park system continues to grow and is perhaps also continually reflected in some of the land trust properties that are being acquired and set aside for either public use as a hiking path, or simply set aside as nature trails in Worcester.